Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Scholar and Gentleman and living rooms across the country. We're here to discuss Book 9 of Brothers Karamazov, titled The Preliminary Investigation. A kind of dramatic and painful read as Dmitri's interrogators frustrate and exasperate him by not letting him actually tell his story the way he wants. So thankfully, things begin on kind of a lighthearted note with Chapter 1, the start of the official Prokotin's career. It's probably my favorite chapter in this section because it's got Madame Koklikov in it at her finest, as usual. I have to say, these two, Prokotin and Koklikov, are kind of a match made in heaven. I love how Prokotin is, he's like, man, there really might have been a murder. So what should I do? Go everywhere except where it might have happened. Like, wake up a bunch of people in the middle of the night. And it's like the most indirect and backwards investigation I've ever heard of. So let's talk about this chapter. Were you guys amused by these characters as much as I am?
Yes. Yeah, no, this chapter was hilarious. Madame Koklikov, especially, like, she goes on this whole thing about how she was certain he was going to kill her.
Yeah.
That was like divine providence that he only killed his father instead. I don't know. It's really wacky. And then I love, like, at the very end of the chapter, I know I always skip to the end, but that's because there's always something funny at the end. Where, like, basically it talks about, like, how they're attracted to each other and how this meeting started something else that he might tell us that story later. So I really am hoping they tell us that story in this book and not in the second book that never got written. But I have no idea because I haven't read this one yet.
I love how excited she was to participate in any way, like how she was delighted to write a note. And how she made it about herself, of course. I mean, that's like her ultimate calling card. And I don't know if she actually thought she was going to get murdered or if she just likes the drama and the attention and this, fetching young gentleman or whatever. I mean, but I also like how easily she fell asleep at the end of it. Like, if you really think you're about to die and you think there's something actually serious afoot, she's like, no, I'm good. I'm going to bed. He's absurd.
Yeah. I love this character. Both of them, really. Because Prokotin is just so, like, methodically boring. And she's so delighted and taken, like, she thinks he's an incredible genius and what a wonderful official he is that she's come to him and then, like, I love when she praises him. She's like, what will be the next step? And he's like, well, I think maybe we should go to the police commissioner. She's like, I would have never thought of that. Like,
I want to know what she would have thought of for the next step.
And she's like, you're such a fine young man and such a great official. I can see you'll be extremely proficient at your job. It's like, great job. Why didn't you maybe start with that? Maybe lead with that next time. It's really fun to watch her philosophy of life absolutely flip-flop, every other chapter. So, like, after being so disappointed in such conduct by Zosima's rotting body, now she's decided to believe in God and miracles again based on the fact that she was spared from this murder that she was supposedly so close to. Yeah, divine providence saved her, and he just went and killed the other guy instead. You know, I do not believe in miracles, but this icon and this obvious miracle with me now, it astounds me, and I'm beginning to believe in anything again. Have you heard about the Elder Zoso?
Yeah. It's like she's about to give the whole her whole theory of life again, and then opts not to. The end of this chapter also has, I think, like in a book that has lots of solid burns in it. I think just like my favorite piece of shade throwing so far, when Peter Illich is like, he's talking about how much they like each other, and she made a pleasant impression on him, and the narrator just dryly, tastes are extremely divergent. That is a known fact.
I like the.
She's not as old as that.
I like, yeah, right in that section there, Aaron, page 450, when he's sort of reflecting about how pleasant she was. She's not as old as all that. He thought it was a pleasure. I like this line. On the contrary, I might have taken her for her own daughter.
Speaking of, someone needs to warn Alyosha. Everyone knows you look to a girl's mother before you make a decision about a girl. So, like, someone should tell Alyosha what's up with that. Be wary, my friend.
Yeah, Lisa's a piece of work. We already can see that. I love how Madame Koklikov practically invited herself along for the rest of the investigation so she could kind of tail this guy. It's like, I'll go in my... She's in her nightgown or whatever.
Mm.
Yeah, very fun chapter. I take that laugh as agreement, Michael, or are you...
Yeah, I was about to make a joke, but it's probably not well placed, so I'm just gonna... I'm gonna hang out here for a while.
All right, stay a while. Okay, how about chapter 2, the alarm? So all these officials are hanging out at the police commissioner's house. And I have to point out another like throwaway but kind of funny aside moment on the first page there on 451. In the front rooms to the billiard table, surrounded by quite decent furnishings. That is, there were even paintings of English racehorses in black frames on the wall, which, as everyone knows, constitute a necessary adornment of any billiard room in a bachelor's house.
I wrote there before neon beer signs.
So whoever gets a pool table, remember to get an English racehorse portrait.
I also like that he called the girls not unattractive. Like, they're non-terrible. Yeah. Like when people are from like Cleveland, they say that someone's Cleveland hot. Oh, sorry, I'm out of place here. I'll take my toxic masculinity home, sorry. Oh, I am home.
Well, we're going to tell on your dad if you don't stop.
I'll be good.
I'm not even sure what question to ask about this chapter. Is there anything to say here? Or is this all just some guys got together and then people start telling their stories?
I mean, the one thing that struck me reading it the first time was they have that description of Dmitri, the prosecutor says, it's clear, that's just how it is with hotheads, tomorrow I'll kill myself, but before I die, a spree. And they seem to say, like, this is just what hotheads do. And I was slightly uncomfortable because we spent a lot of time last time kind of talking about Dimitri's actions as kind of like this existential, spiritual, like he's going through something heavy and deep. This also seems like a pretty reasonable description of Dimitri's state of being right now. And I don't know, it made me feel like, are we reading too much into Dimitri, into his depth? Is he just a hothead on a spree or not?
I would say both is the exact character of Dimitri. And I do want to talk a little bit about that. We get a similar kind of conversion moment as Alyosha had in a later chapter. I don't want to go to that quite now, but I think that's the right place to continue answering the question you've put before us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you put it perfectly. Like, I mean, once again, because like I was thinking the exact same thing. I was just like, man, he's got me again. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's amazing how you can read the book more than once, and yet the author can still manage. Because it's not just like when you pick something up new when you read something again. It's literally like he's still playing new tricks on you in terms of questioning your certainty about your thoughts about the characters. So
Yeah, and it's on the note of rereading, I'll just say from personal experience, by the time you get to the end of this book, you've forgotten what happened at the beginning. So having I've read this once, like around Christmas, and I'm rereading it again, and I'm still finding surprises. So this is one you can definitely reread more than once.
Yeah, even reading this the first time, during some of this testimony, I flipped back just to the chapter that described Dimitri in the garden and with Grigory and leaving. Like, I just read those few pages again because I'm like, wait, they didn't say that. Did they say that? So, and there's still tons of questions. I'm sure there's still tons I missed.
I was hoping someone would do that. I really was. I've done that myself. It's definitely interesting to compare what we're actually given in the narrative versus what the witnesses are saying in these chapters.
Yeah, I'll wait till we actually get to the chapter. There was one specific thing that jumped out at me, but I'll wait till we get there.
Maybe it's.
I also want to say, just sorry, on the question of is he just a hothead on a spree? I mean, I think a huge theme of all of these discussions throughout the weeks has been that no character is just anything. Like, Dostoevsky is so good at writing complex characters. So, yeah, maybe hothead on a spree is part of it, but it's not the whole story. I wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think Dimitri is maybe the character that all too often does get maybe completely categorized quickly as though he is just a hothead. He's the passionate guy. He doesn't really think about things. He just doesn't. But you find out that he has these other internal struggles going on, and they're really messing with his mind in a big way. So we can talk more about that. I think it's one of the last chapters in this book, where he really starts to have some profound thoughts and dream. I do appreciate here too on the kind of rounded characters. Like, maybe it's just a waste of time almost, but Dostoevsky actually spends some time introducing us to these official interrogators, the police commissioner and the prosecutor and the district attorney, and they mainly fulfill this role of just questioning, performing the interrogation, but you still get the sense that these are three-dimensional characters. And I particularly like, by the way, I'll say on that note of rereading, this is the first time ever when I've read this book and I've been able to keep those three guys straight and what their names are. I think it's the hardest name to keep straight in the book. And to know like who's who and who's talking when, it's very hard to follow, I think, the first time. So don't be frustrated if you found that to be the case. This is the first time I've ever followed Who's Who.
I have to scribble notes.
So my personal favorite among these guys is Ippolit Kirillovich, who is the prosecutor, who feels that he's been snubbed and has this special psychological insight into the criminal mind. It's been passed over, and then the district attorney is like the one guy that actually believes him, and then they strike up this great friendship. But I also think it's interesting. You've got the police commissioner, who basically doesn't know the rules. He learns them bit by bit as he goes, and he's just sort of a hothead guy. So that kind of leads us into chapter 3. If no one has any further comments on that one. And I think chapter 3 kind of immediately begins almost with a classic good cop, bad cop type thing. And this just like dramatic melodrama scene. Dmitri shouts that he's not guilty, and as soon as he does it, Grushenka like throws herself in front of him and says, "No, it's me. I'm guilty of everything. I drove him to it, and I'm the guilty one. First and most of all, I'm the guilty one." And then the hothead police commissioner comes right back, like, "Yes, you are the guilty one. You are the chief criminal. Like, you are violent. You are depraved. You are the guilty one. You most of all," screamed the commissioner. And then all the other investigators like, no, don't
do that.
I thought that was pretty comical. Measures, we must take measures. This is entirely out of order. And then, just this, I love this dramatic scene between Dmitri and Grusha. "Grusha, my life, my blood, my holy one." Mitya threw himself on his knees beside her and caught her tight. This, you can just imagine this being really overacted in a soap opera. And I love also that it takes like, oh, maybe that's later. Like they go put her in another room, and at some point she cries, "Woe is me," and like sprints for him, and then he gets up and starts running, and it takes like 4 guys to pull him down and restrain him. All joking aside, maybe it's worth talking a minute about Grushenka's new attachment to Dmitri.
Well, she finally realized her soldier, who she had been waiting for 5 years, was a total jackass. I don't know what word I want there, but total dud. But I'm not quite sure what drove her to immediately then attach to Dmitri.
Yeah, they seem to have suddenly decided they're going to be each other's salvation. And I mean, it's kind of understandable in that I think she's sort of impressed that he came running after her all the way there, like, and brought all this stuff, and like wow, you really dare to come interrupt, me running off with this guy who, by the way, I learned sucks. And here you are, you show up and like you're chasing after me like crazy. And then, it's sort of romantic that he was going to shoot himself because he didn't get her, and all that stuff. So, but it is, I don't know, like I accept this, but I do wonder a little bit, like, is this just drunkenness, or why is she suddenly proclaiming she'll go with him even to, execution and hard labor and all that sort of thing?
Well, Well, it's. I mean, their entire relationship is very romantic in a very overwrought melodramatic sense of the word romantic. But that's. I mean, that's appealing. That sort of overwrought romanticness kind of causes a drunkenness of its own. Like even if they weren't actually drinking, like it's kind of a high.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it's not sincere, but it's very appealing in this. I don't know, in this narrative that we're all taught that romance should be.
Yeah, I completely agree about the idea that it's like drunkenness in itself. And I also think that the darker side of Grushenka also likes the idea. Like, if she is really aware that he was going to destroy himself if he didn't have her, I think it also appeals to both her vanity and her sense of wanting power. And I know that maybe me being harsh toward Grushenka, but I think it gives her some additional security in addition to the romantic narrative. And I do think that, like, there's something about this that to me just resembles, you know, Gollum's obsession in the ring and just something just being something that's obsessive and consuming. To me, I mean, and maybe it can be beautiful, maybe they can be each other's salvation, but I look at it and I see, I mainly just see, I don't know. To me, just the whole situation just feels like a gigantic red flag.
Yeah, and we talked about before with Dmitri and Katya, how she wanted to kind of be his savior. Like we kind of talked about that whole savior role and how that's such a strong narrative for women. And now we see, I think, Grushenka being caught up in a slightly different version of the same thing.
Okay, and so then I'm sorry, did anyone have anything else to say? So then the torments begin. This is the soul's journey through torments, the first torment. And I'm a little bit interested to talk about what you guys think the first, second, and third torments are, and why they're divided to the place they are. So maybe that's something we can keep on the table. But obviously, this is not going well for Dmitri. He sits down thinking, all right, chaps, let me explain everything to you real quick, and you'll laugh at the end, you know? And I think he's incredibly frustrated that he's not allowed to give his story the way he wants to tell it. He keeps getting interrupted with these devilish details, as he calls them. And this whole thing is like, again, kind of tragicomic and really painful to watch, but you can't look away. You know, it's that whole, you know, it's kind of like when Koklakov and Dmitri kept interrupting each other, and you know, no one can get to the point. That kind of keeps happening here too, and it's driving Dmitri insane. But he starts off with such a sort of cheerful demeanor. I mean, it's like when he finds out Grigory isn't dead, he's so suddenly relieved that it's almost like he's like, okay, well, no problem then. Just we'll clean this right up and, you know, move on. So, are there any moments in this first torment that particularly struck you? Any ideas what the torment might be, or any sort of deeper passages worth talking about?
Yeah, I didn't embarrassed that I didn't think much about which how to separate out the torments and so on. It is just brutally painful, partly because in murder mysteries and stuff, you constantly have this thought of like, why don't they just like talk to each other and explain it like rationally to each other? And if they do that, like things would mostly come out okay. And Dmitri is genuinely doing his best, and he's such an audience surrogate kind of, in saying like, look, I understand how this looks bad, like I totally do, and he's trying to be like as understanding as he can be as he describes this really painful, traumatic thing, and it's just brutal to see him get shut down. As far as individual moments, it's really striking his sort of when he's talking about his father and the way that his feelings towards him have changed. I didn't like his appearance. It was dishonorable, boastful, trampling on all of its holy mockery and unbelief, loathsome, loathsome. But now that he's dead, I think differently. That's all in 462. And he has this, this moving regret that this man that he admits that he hated was dead. It is tempered that he says right after that, I'm not so beautiful myself, and therefore I had no right to consider him repulsive. That's the thing. Perhaps you can write that down. And that's, a nice moment of self-awareness from Dmitri, that's only slightly undermined by the fact that he absolutely just rails on Smerdyakov like 6 pages later, as far as describing people as repulsive and gross. So wisdom does not always last. It's a tough read, almost in the same way as the delirium chapter before it, where you can just see him digging his own grave deeper and deeper.
Yeah, he really does a perfect job of shooting himself in the foot.
Yeah.
I do love like how just exasperated he gets with when they have to write things down, and how then he goes on forever saying, "Write that down." Are you going to write that down? Like, perhaps you can write that down. Like, and it's always like he makes like these grand statements, that have nothing to do with the case. And he's like, "Write that down."
It's like when I catch students like cheating, or like you catch somebody, like somebody's been caught in an affair in other literature. They over-explain everything. Let me tell you the real truth. Let me tell you the whole story. It's got that vibe to it. It's overly genuous and disingenuous at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
A perfect example of this, what you're talking about there, Aaron. Page 460, roughly halfway down, he makes this kind of confession that's definitely doing him no good. Of violence, guilty. Of inflicting a savage beating on a poor old man, guilty. And then within himself, too, inside in the bottom of his heart, he is guilty. But there's no need to write that down. He turns
I love the write this down, don't write that down. That's just hilarious all the way through these chapters. But I also really admired the way he's like, this sounds terrible. This sounds like I'm guilty, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Like, I thought that attitude was admirable. Even though it's kind of over the top melodramatic. But just that kind of recognition that, like, yep, this sounds terrible, but what you gonna do?
I want to talk about a passage in 462 that I highlighted. It's basically that big middle paragraph, and he's sort of explaining what's been some of his psychological motivators in this whole episode. You see, gentlemen, you seem to be taking me for quite a different man than what I am, he suddenly added, glumly and sadly. It is a noble man you are speaking with, a most noble person. Above all, do not lose sight of this. a man who has done a world of mean things, but who always was and remained a most noble person, as a person, inside, in his depths. Well, in short, I don't know how to say it. This is precisely what has tormented me all my life, that I thirsted for nobility, that I was, so to speak, a sufferer for nobility, seeking it with a lantern, Diogenes' lantern, and meanwhile all my life I've been doing only dirty things, as we all do, gentlemen. He has to backtrack it. I mean, me alone, gentlemen, not all, but me alone. I made a mistake, me alone. I think he's said some statements like this before, even in his like euphoric confessions in verse of an ardent heart and all that stuff, about this inner struggle where he really wants to be good and he simply can't bring himself to do it. I think this is something that that is so important to him. It's very important for him that he is a noble person, that he has his dignity, that he has certain lines that he won't cross. Like, and being a thief is one of those lines. Like, I'm not a thief. Every other bad thing, yeah, but not a thief. This kind of reminds me of some of the passages where they're reflecting about the Karamazov nature. And it seems like an acknowledgement of that part of him that he just cannot control, even though it's so important to him that he somehow pursue the higher or purer path.
It's as we were going through these chapters, I was, we've talked about him as a essentialist. I keep getting struck with just how impatient he is. In economics, we call that having a low discount factor, like a puppy, like only thinks of the moment, like live in the moment. But there's something important about strategizing, about thinking across time. And this is somebody who can't. All his strategies are this second. All of his, plans are get rich quick right now schemes, kind of, thinking. And he can't stop himself. Whatever he wants, whatever nobility he wishes, he can't think past like this second. What he needs right now.
Although vitally, like he uses that as an excuse, and he's really, really ashamed of like the moments where he calculates being a dick. Like that's the big secret that he can't bear to face. That he's not just a lost puppy kind of seeking nobility in all the wrong places, but that he's actually been pursuing some pretty grimy deeds. With malice aforethought.
It seems like one of the things that really torments him, I'm not sure that this is the torment here necessarily, but is that he cannot get these other men to regard him as having any honor whatsoever. He's a criminal on trial, but he's trying to present himself as cooperative. I'll explain. I'll even give evidence against myself. I'll show you parts of my soul that are shameful. And he just keeps feeling like they're sort of trampling on him, that they don't understand any of his motives. They can't understand any of his desire for any degree of purity or goodness. That's something I'll talk more in some of the next chapters. But
can I ask a question? Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Well, Jason said he has malice. He has malice of forethought. Do you think it's malice of forethought or malice of like right now thought?
Usually, I think he has malice of right now thought. The thing that I was trying to reference was the holding back Katerina's money.
The 1,500.
The 1,500
that we're not sure about, but
right.
But maybe.
It seems
Like if that's his best scheme, it's still an asshole scheme.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that and we're not in that chapter yet, but he certainly seems most ashamed of, like, you guys can't even understand how much this tormented me, that I could kind of redeem myself at least partly, but I'm hanging on to it because I might need it to do something even more shameful, and I'm planning for that. So I agree with Jason on that one. That seems like he seems to be most ashamed of. I mean, he knows he's base and impulsive, but like it's really, really bad for him it's kind of the ultimate thing if he's planned on this kind of ultimate dishonor, which he could avoid, you know.
I could see that. I would agree with those.
And the way the prosecutor, I mean, we're jumping ahead, but might as well. The prosecutors just cannot understand that at all. They're viewing him as a scoundrel, like a criminal. Like, well, why don't you just go ask Katerina for the money? And he's like, seriously, guys? I'm supposed to go ask my fiance for the money to run off with, like, the girl I'm cheating on her with? Good idea, guys. Like, and they're like, oh, yeah, maybe you do have a point.
Well,
Although I do love. Here you go.
sorry. I just, before we move on too much, Mixie, when you read that long passage on 462 about him saying, I am actually a noble person, I just do the wrong thing. And then he said, as we all do, I mean, actually just me. I didn't notice this when I read it earlier, but when you read it out loud, it kind of made me sad that he walked it back from saying, hey, everybody does this, to no, it's just me. Because I think part of the problem, again, is the tendency for the not interviewers, what's the word? Interrogators, to see him like, this is a scoundrel, this is a thief, this is a bad guy, he does bad things, as opposed to seeing him as a complex person. And yes, maybe he has poor impulse control, maybe he, more often just does the right now get rich quick schemes. Like, not everybody does that all the time, but I think it's true that everybody does less good than they want to do, no matter what.
I have two thoughts. I'm really glad you said that. So one thought is that walk back almost echoes a Zosima, like, a confession of I'm actually the worst of all. It has an echo of it. Whether it's intended that way or not, I'm not really sure. I think it maybe is just backtracking because he's offended. These other guys, like, we don't all do the same things you do, Dimitri. Like, but as you were talking there, I also just suddenly remembered, since we were talking about how the prosecutor couldn't, they didn't understand, the real shame for him, and even suggest that he go ask money from his fiance to run off with the other girl. I think it's especially ironic that the person who made that suggestion was Ippolit Kirillovich, the prosecutor with special insight into the psychology of the criminal mind. And he can't even understand the basics of, like, girls don't like it when you ask them for money to cheat on them. Like,
is he the one the author said had a fat and childless wife?
yes,
And then he left because she had a toothache?
that's correct.
Yeah, he sounds like a good source here.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating to see, like, Dimitri, who's like, if you want to go back to, like, the carriage driver or whatever, where he asked for, like, he talks about, like, asking him for forgiveness for the sake of all, or something like that, where he wants the carriage driver to forgive him for all of things, or I'm not exactly sure how he puts it, but, like, it's kind of that idea where this carriage driver is now in, like, this different mode of being in this, like, I don't know the word for it. He's between, like, he's the intermediary, I guess is the word I'm looking for everyone. And here's Dimitri, like, kind of stepping out of his character. He has this, like, certain form of guilt, and now he's kind of asking for forgiveness, but, like, Dimitri doesn't ask for forgiveness. Like, this is, like, a really far, and I'm going way back here, I'm sorry about that, but he's going way out of his, like, character. He's asking for forgiveness, but Dimitri doesn't ask for forgiveness typically. He's, like, kind of stuck in who he is. He's kind of stuck in his guilt. Guilt is a big thing for Dimitri. He's always worried about his guilt. He wants to be guilty, but he doesn't want to ask for forgiveness. And, like, that's the pride part. It's, like, the shameful part to ask for forgiveness for Dimitri. He has to be right. He has to persist in his ways. And we see this through this entire interrogation. This is the whole theme. Like Dmitri has to be right. He has to persist in his ways, and he has to be born out in that, and perfected in his way, in how he wants to say it and how he wants to do it. But he cannot, for the life of him, like stoop to the level of asking for forgiveness or for doing anything outside of his way. Like it's Dmitri is just like pure out pride, like born out to the nth degree. And whether it's like his conversations with the interrogators or everything else, but like it's that vacillation you see with the carriage driver that really kind of like is Dmitri kind of breaking down, or is he going to actually flip? Can he actually turn from this? And it's like, I don't know. This is my reading of all of it, but that's kind of what I see.
I completely agree that this kind of over exaggerated sense of honor is what gets him in a lot of trouble. It's a real bad combination to have an extreme sense of honor and pride mixed with a completely impulsive, unrestrained, passionate, impulsiveness. And that's kind of how he got into this whole mess, is that 3,000 rubles that he just can't bring himself to kind of confess and ask forgiveness, and he has to pay it back. I don't know. I lost my train of thought. You can go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, it's really difficult because it's like so like way out of there, like all kinds of different points like coming together, but it's like kind of all these different points from everywhere, like kind of go. It's like, but the baseline is like, if you want to focus on Dmitri, his thing is about guilt. Like he always professes his guilt, but that's different from Alyosha, or it's different from Zosima. They don't talk about being guilty on behalf of all and for all, but that's Dmitri. It's like greatest. It's like glory to the greatest in me. It's like always about like self elevation and self falling, almost like self condemnation. I'm guilty for everything, and it's better if I take this worm out of existence on behalf of all and for all. It's not about forgiveness. It's about guilt, and it's about like pride. It's not about humility, and Zosima is about humility. Dmitri is about pride, and it's like this counterpoint to Zosima here on the fullness or the universality of guilt, or universality of sin, the universality of forgiveness. I mean, this is kind of where it's at. I don't know.
Well, I think an important point too, as you've been talking about forgiveness and guilt the last few minutes, it came to my mind, and I'm not going to use the correct language probably for it because I'm not Catholic, but there's this idea that I've gotten from, I don't know, like TV shows and stuff, like pop culture. But in Catholic confession, it's not just about confessing what I did wrong and saying I'm sorry, but it's also the second piece of it is the repentance, saying I'm not planning on doing it again. And I think maybe that's the piece that's missing when you talk about Dmitri, and it's almost childlike, like when like a young child in child development, when a kid first learns like, oh, you do something wrong and you say you're sorry, they kind of go through this phase, and some people don't really outgrow it, where you can do whatever you want as long as you say sorry. So you kind of don't think about, so like admitting you're guilty or asking for forgiveness, it's kind of leaving out that repentance, or that I'm not going to do this again, or I'm going to be more thoughtful about what I do. It's just, oh, I'm guilty, I'm a worm. So it's missing a piece.
I think honor is such a driving notion for him, and we, that's something you see in a lot of different literature, sort of the honor that becomes destructive, and the only way to preserve honor here is either pay back the money or kill yourself and wipe yourself off the face of the earth and punish yourself. Like his suicide note, like, I punished myself for my whole life. It doesn't seem like he considers forgiveness to be an option. And yeah.
Or duel like Zosima. I mean, that's the other way to preserve your honor. Is like kill someone else, like fight to the death, or fight to the injury or something. But
to the pain.
Yeah. Depending on how you sketch it out, it's like it's all about those people running around.
Speaking of guilt and so forth, I think there's one other noteworthy little episode worth talking about in this chapter, and that's when the police commissioner, Mikhail Makarovich, who began the chapter by screaming at Grushenka for no apparent reason, has had a change of heart here and goes down and talked with Grushenka, calmed her down, and just sort of took care of her. And then he comes back up and lets Dmitri know that she's okay. And he even has like tears in his eyes at the time, which is a little surprising. You can see that like he actually does have some empathy here. And I thought that's a kind of a touching moment. And Dmitri is so moved by that. That gesture, he sort of has a little rapturous moment there. Does anyone have any comments about that? I'm going to quote a passage next if no one does.
Good way to get your convicted to cooperate.
Well, now he's good cop, bad cop in his own person.
Yep. Exactly.
And actually, Dmitri does in fact declare his intention to cooperate after that. But he has this little rhapsodic outburst about Grushenka that I want to read that I thought was significant on 464. But gentlemen, this woman is the queen of my soul. Oh, allow me to say it. This is something I'm going to reveal to you. I can see I'm with the noblest men. She is my light, my holy one, and if only you knew. Did you hear her cry, I'll go with you, even to execution? And what have I, a naked beggar, given her? Why such love for me? Clumsy and shameful. Is anyone hearing a horn going off in the background?
Yep.
Hey.
It's not my fault. I don't think.
It was Jason. He just disappeared to take care of it.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Taggy, what are you doing?
I get the context, but it wasn't my fault this time.
You were looking guiltily to the side at the time, so...
I'm pouring a drink. It's
I automatically blame you. Sorry.
As someone who's been like the scapegoat in every group his whole life, like, it is so great being on the other side. Tag, I just want to thank you for taking one for the team. Like, it is so good for it to be someone else. It feels great.
My pleasure. I'm used to it, and when I'm pouring a drink, it makes it even easier.
I apologize for any human grief and for your kind soul, Michael Taggy.
Well, may God forgive us both.
Okay, so I'm in the middle of this quote. What have I, a naked beggar, given her? Why such love for me? Am I, a clumsy and shameful creature with a shameful face, worthy of such love that she should go to hard labor with me? She just laid herself at your feet for me. She, a proud woman and not guilty of anything. How can I not adore her, not cry out, not long for her as I do now? Oh, gentlemen, forgive me. But now I'm comforted. So my speculation is that the first torment is actually that he has not been able to communicate with Grushenka that they've been separated, and he hasn't been able to let her know, like, I'm not guilty of this, whatever. So that's my speculation on the first torment. So, anyone else want to speculate?
I agree on the first torment, but I have to admit I was baffled by what are the second and third ones. I was really mixed up as I was reading the next two.
Yeah, I would agree with the first torment. I mean, they were basically just, making out when everybody walked in and this whole thing started. So they just got to a point where they felt like they were both into each other at the same time and really wanted to like make something happen, and then it was interrupted, and they just had to like take a step back and couldn't, like, all of these emotions were running through them and they just couldn't do anything about it. I think that is definitely a torment.
Do you think it's symbological, or do you think it's like time based? Like, I wonder if it's like just rounds of interrogation. Like, here's the first round of interrogation, the first torment, the second round, second torment, third round.
Yeah,
I agree with Taggy.
Go on, Michael or Micah.
Well, because if you think about it, 3 torments, everything in this book likes to link to other things, right? So in the Inquisitor chapter, right, he puts Christ through 3 problems. And like there were 3 temptations in the desert. And so there are 3 torments. And this is, again, what? It's an interrogation. So I always thought the torments, they're not necessarily what is it in terms of Dimitri's experience as much as there are 3 things that are being thrown at him. First is the isolation. The second is letting him know about Grushenka. Like, I always thought it was about what was being inflicted on him by the police.
I don't have a definite idea or opinion on this. I'm just curious to hear what people think. And the question is, why did he divide the chapters at these particular points too? Like, why 3? What's the rationale for this ends this little episode and the next one begins? I don't know. I just think it's interesting to think about.
Well, I'm sure there's a rhyme and reason to it. I mean, I don't think that, like, Dostoevsky is like, well, that's just when I went to bed for the night.
Maybe.
I mean, very well could be, I guess, but I mean.
Let's move on to the second torment. I'm having trouble remembering exactly what happened in this particular one. The interrogation kind of runs together for me.
Sober and wise, he's stupid. Drunk and stupid, he's wise.
Sounds like a fortune cookie.
They share a border. It's cool.
He's still in a pretty good mood here, or he comes back to a good mood, and he's starting to make jokes. And that's another painful thing. It's like it's sort of like joke, and then it's crickets, and they're like inappropriate, That's how I am. Haha, I see, by the way, that it's not proper for me to be cracking jokes with you yet. That is before we've explained everything. Allow me to keep my dignity.
That ship has sailed, friend.
Yeah. So he makes a long speech about how
God, this guy. Let's spend 1,500 rubles on gypsy women, and let me keep my dignity. I particularly like when they asked him about the pestle or the mortar or whatever he stole, and he hemmed and hawed, and he was like, "I took it for the dogs." I mean, like, he really is not helping himself here. You could feel the weight of how they were staring at him.
that makes me wonder. One idea I have, but I'm not really sure if it holds up, as I'm kind of reskimming about the torments. Are the torments pieces of self-incriminating evidence? Because the first one, yep, I hated my father and threatened him. The second one, yep, I had a weapon.
What could be more tormenting than
No, with that slip of the tongue, we go with that.
Spider-Man.
That was really weird.
Freudian slip?
Yeah, I had a weapon. It's not even this. Anyway. I don't know where I was going, and I don't know what the third one is yet because I haven't read that chapter. But no.
Yeah, I took the weapon to kill my dad as not a compelling defense. I mean, that's sort of like, your question's so absurd, I'm going to tell you I did it is, I don't think that's ever worked.
I'll just point out on 469, maybe Madame Koklikov was right. This is like 2/3 of the way down. Finally, having described his despair and told them of that moment when, as he walked out of Madame Koklikov's, he had even had the thought of quickly putting a knife into someone just to get the 3,000. He was stopped again. It was recorded that, quote, he wanted to put a knife into someone.
Yeah.
Maybe she was close to death.
This is amazing, like how Dmitri just like self-incriminates himself from like an external point of view, and like it says all the wrong things at all the wrong times, and it's just like,
And then he refuses at other points to explain like necessary things. Like, why?
But like I find the somewhat mind-boggling thing is like how he relies on his honor to justify himself for when he actually like says like, oh yeah, but I didn't actually do it, and so you should actually believe me because I have this like super awesome honor.
Just like you guys.
And then he says stuff like a couple sentences after what you just read. If I didn't kill this Fenya right then, gentlemen, it was only because I had no time. Like, why would you even say that?
He's got like this I don't know, he's just not focused on like any sort of intelligible like thing. Like he's completely not trying to play them, but like they want to be played, but they're kind of like filling in the gaps from what he's saying, and it's just like this huge entire mess. Like he's like, you guys should see how honorable I am. Like I wanted to like hold back this thing because I couldn't like use that lady's money to like go cheat on this other person. I had to like find other money to go cheat on some other person. And it's like, you should see, like, that's honorable, right? Like, you should see how honorable I am. So when I'm super honorable, like, you should believe me when I say I didn't kill my dad. But, like, I really actually wanted to him. But, like, after it was the fact, like, I didn't want to. It's like, it's not compelling. It's not, like, normal. But he's, like, so focused on it. Like, honor is everything to Dmitri. And it's, like, this really weird sense of honor.
And I think this is an example of where he's being more emotional than anything else, because he's not telling the story in like a clear or logical manner, and he's clearly not thinking about how do I tell this story so it sounds like I'm not guilty. He's so emotionally wrapped up in which pieces were important to him or which pieces were not important to him that it's coming out jumbled.
I realized I was talking with my microphone muted. Why no one ever let me say a word. But to Michael's point about his bizarre sense of honor, I just think it's pretty comical to, he's like, gentlemen, let me explain to you just how important it is for me to run off honorably from my fiance. Like, I need to do the honorable way of ditching the nice girl and betraying her. So it's very important to betray her honorably.
Okay, that's humorous, but I'm just going to throw out there as a woman, like, if I were engaged to a dude and he cheated on me and wanted to be with this other woman, I would rather he left me to go be with her than, like, married me and kept cheating. That's my 2 cents on that.
Well, I agree, and he has a certain point, but I just think this is not a good way to convince your interrogators that you're an honorable man. It's like, listen, guys, I'm ditching my fiance, but I'm an honorable man, so I got to do it honorably. Like, and that's why you should believe me that I never would do anything else bad. You know.
Well, it's really interesting that Dmitri wants to like set himself up as like this honorable person, but it's like his honor like is in a different world almost. Like in Dmitri's world, this is a very honorable exploit, but like in the normal world, like cheating on your fiance is not honorable. But like to Dmitri, like cheating on your fiance is, well, I kind of, yes, okay, fine, maybe that's not honorable, but at least I didn't do it as dishonorable as possible. And so I've retained some sort of sense of honorability by not doing it the most dishonorable way possible.
I
Right.
think
Isn't there a right way to do the wrong thing?
That's Dimitri's perspective. I mean,
I mean, the world is gray. I mean, he's doing the wrong thing, but there's probably a less bad way to do the bad thing.
Yeah, I think what you have to, this is what the prosecutors simply don't grasp about him, is that despite, it's thieves' honor, right? Except exactly, this is for him, the line that you can never cross is the thief line. That's the dishonorable, like,
which is ironic.
I'm a scoundrel, you know, I'm impulsive, I'm cheating, I admit all that, I can't help it, my heart is messy. But one thing I do have control of is I don't have to steal and I never will steal. You know?
He's defined what stealing is. I mean, almost everybody would say he already stole.
Well, but I think he has the intention to pay it back in his, you know, own.
I'm going to stop paying my mortgage and tells Wells Fargo that.
Well, technically, that's not stealing. That's just like
you know what I mean. Like that doesn't hold up.
Right. Well,
in his mind, this is very important. Like, I am somehow going to make up that. I mean, that's the whole thing that got him in this tragedy. Is he's got to find that 3,000 rubles to pay back Katerina.
To maintain his honor.
Right.
Because he doesn't want to steal. Because he set up stealing as a boundary he can't cross, but then he doesn't actually cross it. But he doesn't intend to cross it, but he actually does. And so it's like this whole other quagmire that he wants to not be in. And
it's interesting how he plays a shell game with that. He's willing to take the money from other people to give it back to her to like just move from one creditor to the next.
Yeah, and what really gets him in trouble, the whole reason he has this dilemma is a pride and honor issue, because it is unthinkable to him that he not be the one to provide for the money to run off with Grushenka, even though he knows she has a ton of money. Like, that's just like, it has to be the guy. You know, I have to be the one with the money. Thus, I'm saving this 1,500, you know. So I still need to come up with 3,000 to repay Katerina, but I need this 1,500 in case I need to run off.
But I can't use that money to run off.
As we discover, right.
Because that's dishonorable too. Like it's just.
But as we
like,
discovered, this was completely unnecessary because Grushenka doesn't care about it at all. Like, you know, she would have paid for them to go wherever they were going to go to the ends of the earth. So it's really tragic that this point of like, I need to be the man who provides the money, and it is really what gets him in this whole mess. Because he could have gone back to Katerina, made that vow, returned the 1,500, you know, and not been any of this dilemma. And maybe he would have found a way to pay her back too. Even Grushenka was like, we'll pay her back. You know, like she was kind of laughs, like, no big deal. So it definitely was Dmitri that got himself in that whole mess. It's like a dilemma of his own creation, because he has these absolutely rigid lines that he can't cross that are just like the ultimate, you know, this is the thing that dishonors me to myself or whatever, that I can't respect myself after if I do this thing.
Right. Well, that's to my point of like being pride. Like he set up himself as like this sort of weird idol. Like this is what he can't. This is what he has to worship. This is what's held up in esteem and not held up in esteem, and lines worth breaking or inconsequential lines, and some sort of weird de facto real black and white lines, and like it's non-consequential to anyone else except for him. And if you could get into the minds of Dmitri, yes, everything would make perfect sense. And of course, the investigators would say, like, well, if they thought like Dmitri, like, yeah, he didn't kill his dad. But the real world is not you. But Dmitri is kind of isolated. He's in his own special little hell, I think, where he exists by himself and thinking to himself and absorbed in this little weird worldview. He needs someone to break into it, but he's not finding that.
So I think the torment in this one is simply being unable to tell his story the way he wants to tell it and being constantly sidetracked into these devilish details and so forth. I thought there was an interesting little psychological moment near the end of the chapter on 471. He for some apparent reason suddenly tells them about a dream that he has repeatedly. One particular dream, and I often dream it, it keeps repeating itself, that someone is chasing me. Someone I'm terribly afraid of is chasing me in the darkness at night, looking for me. And I'm hiding from him somewhere behind a door or a wardrobe, hiding in a humiliating way. And moreover, he knows perfectly well where I'm hiding, but he seems to pretend not to know where I am on purpose in order to torment me longer, in order to revel in my fear. That's what you're doing now. It's just the same. I would submit that person is actually Katerina, by the way.
What page is the dream on? I can't seem to find it.
471 at the top. It seems like Katerina knows everything already, and she's the one that kind of torments him like that. That's his sense of lost honor and so forth.
That makes perfect sense. I assumed off the bat that it was God.
Well, that makes sense too, but but Katerina is maybe the particularly concrete instance of where someone knows exactly how bad he is. He's trying to hide from it, but she knows exactly what he's up to, and in some sense is even stringing him along or something. Like we've talked a little bit about how somehow she wants this vengeance for having been put in a humiliating position, and now he's the one in the humiliating position that needs her forgiveness or whatever. So
what's kind of interesting that like Dmitri is like all this like he doesn't actually want forgiveness though. I don't think he wants forgiveness. I think he just wants to be accepted on his own terms. He's kind of like Ivan in this respect. Like he wants to like have all the answers or be right about this, but like he doesn't want to actually repent. And like that's the whole commonality between Ivan and Dmitri. Neither one of them want to like turn from their ways and seek after something better. Dmitri would be more than happy just to be guilty for everything. Like he's okay with that. Like I'm just a scoundrel. I'm just evil, and like there's no I'm incorrigible. There's nothing worth saving. And then like he has this like absurd nightmare where like someone might actually see him for what he is, but like not condemn him. But that's like worse than actually like condemning him. Like he wants to be condemned. He wants to live in this little hell.
Michael, that's so brilliant because I'm just thinking of Zosima's chapter where he's got a discourse on hell, and it's pretty much what you just described about, like being in the presence of love, and it's a torment because of the conscience sort of rebuking you. You can't feel worthy to look it in the eye or whatever.
And that's interesting too, because I didn't quite buy the whole the dream figure was Katerina until you said this other part, because that's what Katya's done. Katya said, I don't care what he's done. I still want to be with him. I still want to, like all this stuff. She still loves him. And I didn't really understand how that love could be a scary dream nightmare thing.
I think that torments me more because
But yeah, it makes sense.
it's easier to be guilty and go off into your dark corner and leave that entire world than face the person that you've wronged and then be like, you're letting me back in. Like you are the reminder of how bad I've been. You are the ultimate symbol of my terrible soul or whatever. So Katya's love could absolutely be the perfect sort of hell for him. How about chapter 5, the third torment?
Ooh, before we move on, just to shout out the most excellent. If you try to cram it all in, you're gonna need 3 volumes and an epilogue. Little meta line. Solid bits, Fyodor.
I'm reminded of a play that we. What was this? The Importance of Being Earnest. Do not speak slightingly of the 3-volume novel. Ginny might remember that. Did we see that together? It was Anne Bast delivered that line in a Scottish accent, and it was like one of the funniest things I'd ever seen.
I don't remember that.
I think it was maybe a salon reading of Importance of Being Earnest.
Okay, yeah, if it was salon, I probably wasn't there.
That's the fanciest thing you've ever said, McGee.
Yeah. I speak French. Salon.
It's a salon reading.
So we have the third torment. And again, I'm just getting lost in what happened in which chapter here. So if you have points that jumped out at you, chime in. I have a couple that I marked that we can get to, but I'm trying to remember what actually happened in this particular chapter.
A lot of it was for me more the same frustration that he kept saying, I've done this thing you're thinking I'm doing in a sardonic way. Okay, I get it, Dimitri.
Well, I think it's like interesting that he keeps getting blasted. Like, I keep doing all these bad things, and like, yes, I'm really this wretch, but like, he's getting blasted in this like humbled position, but he can't ever accept it. Like, he still wants to fight while he's down. Like, he still doesn't.
Are we not doing phrasing anymore?
What's that?
Sorry, that was an Archer joke.
Aaron, that was fabulous.
Did I miss something? I missed a
Continue,
joke.
Peggy.
What's that?
Continue, sir.
He just keeps like getting stuck where he's like he's fighting for his honor while he's down. Like, he's being humiliated, but like he's still fighting for his honor. Like, it's like this whole like he's stuck. He doesn't want to cry out like I'll go to hell if I'm wrong. Like, or I'll go to hell even if I'm right. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll just be in hell. Like, it's fine. And like, it's just like a continuation of what I was speaking about before with like the comparison with Ivan or whatever, how they're like, I don't know if I even care if I'm right or wrong. I just want to be in hell, more or less. Like, and here he is, like, getting kicked while he's down, and like he's just taking it, and like instead of asking for like forgiveness or from turning from it, or like he's just like, yeah, I'm just terrible. But I still have honor. It's kind of weird, but painful.
I'm surprised I'm going to say this because I normally don't, but Taggy, I think I actually disagree with your reading on something for a change.
All right, fine.
Because in this case, when Dimitri says, I'll just go to hell, it's fine, whatever, I think it actually is much more resemblant of what Aaron was talking about earlier with the economics. Like, for Dmitri, it's because, because you got to remember, right? If you think about police interrogations, because remember I watched this video about two experts saying why you never talk to the cops, right? And after I watched it, I was like, oh, of course I'd talk to the cops if they brought me in. I'm a good citizen. I wouldn't have been guilty, so I want to give them as much information as I want. Then I watched this video from a couple experts, and now I tell everyone, never talk to the cops, because it can only hurt you. And the thing is, one of the big things they always have on you is this. You don't know how long you're going to be in that room, right? Dmitri, when he says it doesn't matter, all he wants is to tell his story and maybe in some way to get out of the room. He is in such anguish of whatever is going to happen next. He just wants it to happen. So in that sense, I think it's one of those things where, I feel like the torment, I just don't think, this is not like Ivan giving it back, because Ivan, when he does it, it's about being deliberate. For Dmitri, it's almost like I can't handle it, so I'm just going to do whatever I have to do to make this stop. And I feel like that's really it. It's a frenzy. And I feel like Dmitri, with everything we know about his passion, it doesn't, I can't remember if it talks about Dmitri's feelings in terms of thinking about him like someone in a cage, if it gets deeply in his feeling about being in there. But the fact that they interrupt him at every turn, that they curve him at every turn, that he is so obsessed with his honor, I feel like a lot of this isn't so much I don't even know how much we can say he means a lot of the things he says, because sometimes it doesn't even come across as coherent. It may be a little bit coherent to us because we know what he's trying to get at, because we've been with him the whole time. But I don't even know, I'm not saying you're wrong and that he isn't proud, but I feel like it's the pride of a drunken man who doesn't know when to stop fighting, rather than the pride of someone who, this is, because when you're in that much pain, or in that you're that upset, sometimes, it's almost I almost wish some guy would just knock him out, right? Just to let him sleep it off and let him come back with a sober mind.
I think that
It's
sorry, are you finished?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I was just going to say, I think that he either wants to tell the story his own way, or if they're not going to listen and do it the way he wants, then just let them do whatever they're he'll hang. He'd rather hang than, kind of dishonor himself in these devilish details. As he gets more and more dejected that they're not going to listen to him, that they don't believe him, that, they're not even giving him a chance to tell his version of the story. You see this kind of cooperation go down, and fine, just write that I killed him, whatever, let's just get out of here. So I kind of agree with Mike on that one. He's so impulsive. He's like, this interrogation is the worst thing imaginable. You guys don't respect me at all. That's already clear. You've already made up your minds, so why bother?
he's impetuous. He's impatient. He doesn't know does anyone know the Russian legal system? I mean, in this case, I'd tell a consultant to shut up, maintain asymmetric information, lawyer up, don't say a word.
Well, and they certainly did say, they basically told him you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to answer any questions you don't want to. So, yeah, he's definitely doing it to himself here.
But another thing I think it's easy to forget, because I kept forgetting until the narrator points it out a couple times, or maybe Dmitri says it, I'm not sure, is that he has literally been up all night. He's been up all night partying. These interrogators didn't show up till 4 or 5 a.m. and they're keeping him awake, all day? I don't know how long this is taking, hours upon hours upon hours. So he hasn't slept in 24, 36 hours, which is also kind of torturous and terrible.
Yeah, and he spent his last days before that running around to,
Yeah, and being paranoid.
Like Leogavi woodlot errand where he stayed up all night trying to, take care of a drunk guy in a room full of fumes and stuff.
Right,
So,
almost
This
got
is-
poisoned.
The 1860s version of sodium pentothal. No? Okay.
I didn't get it. I'm going to make a.
I know too much about
It's the
torture.
truth serum.
I see. Wonderful. I don't know if anyone else noticed this odd language when he talks about jumping down to check on Grigory, after he'd smacked him. And we mentioned this kind of in that chapter as well. There's this odd phrase that he says, and the narrator makes a point about like he didn't even think to tell them that he had a sort of compassionate moment there, and uttered a sort of phrase that's supposed to be somewhat like showing empathy or something. And that phrase is, you came a cropper, old man. There's no help for it now. Lie there or whatever. And you came a cropper was completely baffling to me. So since it came up again, I actually looked this up on Google, and it's like a British slang phrase. Come a cropper means it evidently came originally from falling off a horse headlong. And so it came to mean either like fall or fail completely, or somehow kind of come to ruin. So that is what that means, just in case anyone else was curious and baffled.
I also thank you for that, because I had no idea what that phrase meant, and that kind of helped. But I was very struck on that page by. I thought it was very significant. It says it didn't occur to Mitya to tell them that he had jumped down out of pity, because this is another case in which he's just having a really hard time explaining what happened. And then it says in the following paragraph that the guy who thinks he knows everything about the psychology of criminals basically thinks that the only reason he would have jumped down was to make sure that the witness was actually really dead. And that's just such a misinterpretation of any of his motivations for jumping down, that I think it's really sad, and it's really striking that that's another moment where he's completely unable to communicate his actual intentions. Which might even be the third torment. If we're talking about the torments as self-incriminations, then that's probably the one for this chapter, his motivation for hitting Grigory.
The other thing is, this is the chapter where he gets told now he even has to undress. And I think for a person like him, this is sort of the ultimate insult. Like, okay, now it's a strip search. Like, there goes any last bit of honor or dignity or whatever.
Also, I love that he's embarrassed because his underwear is dirty.
Yeah.
That's like that old stereotypical, like the mom says, like, always wear clean underwear because you never know when, you be picked up by an ambulance or whatever.
Yeah, it's
Like,
serious,
that's the problem.
serious bachelor problems here.
It's funny because back in 2008, I was in this horrible car accident that nearly killed me, and I was like utterly in shock right after. And I called my mom to like let her know that I was like going to be going to the hospital and everything. And like I was in such shock that like I'd actually been told that. So like the first thing I said to her on the phone in like total monotone was that I had on clean underwear.
Against all odds, that story did end up being funny. Wow.
That's what I'm saying. It's a stereotypical mom thing.
Yeah. It's good advice.
Why aren't they concerned that I need to be like cut out with the jaws of life? They care that the paramedics think my underpants are clean. Never understood those priorities. Ugh. This triple was delicious.
Which triple is that?
Unholy by Coppertail.
I've never seen it around here.
They don't distribute, unfortunately, north of Civil War lines.
Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah, come on down and try it, Taggy. I'll take you there.
All right. Put on my trip list. My triple list.
Hey! First Belgium, second Tampa.
Now I'm just thinking the line Florida man found with clean underwear.
Great headline.
Can you see me clapping?
Yeah.
Because
Florida
I'm
man
clapping.
is usually naked, so.
Or dressed like a teddy bear, t-shirt only.
Just Donald Duck.
The fact that Florida man is usually naked is why it's a headline.
Like, I remember one of them was Florida man sneaks into restaurant, like gets naked, eats noodles he brought with him. Like, they only found that out because they were reviewing video footage because someone else had broken into the restaurant and stolen some stuff. But then while they're watching it, they found out there was some naked guy that just randomly showed up, or he rode in, took all his clothes off, ate some noodles, and left.
Man.
Like,
I'd like to make it clear you're all welcome to visit me in this beautiful state.
this is probably our cue to move on to the next chapter as well.
The one thing, actually, could I
please.
raise for the third torment? This is the one where Dmitri says that he didn't do it, or highlights the moment that he didn't do it. And he offers a couple of reasons for not. He says, whether it was someone's tears or God heard my mother's prayers or a bright spirit kissed me at that moment, I don't know. But the devil was overcome. Do we have any guesses as to what it was that would stay his hand in that moment? Is it just random synapse firing? Or being impulsive, or he never really intended to do anything that serious? He seems to think that it took a miracle.
I was disconcerted, actually, at the mother reference, because she hasn't been up since, like, the first chapter, right?
Mm-hmm. And she's the one who used to beat Fyodor.
Yeah. So that combination.
I guess in that chapter when it was happening, I'm not really sure why either, because it does kind of talk about anger boiling him up, and he even grabs the pestle in his pocket. But I guess I kind of thought the motivation would simply be, okay, Grushenka isn't here, and that's his main concern. He's established that, and so even though he gets real mad, maybe it's like, run and find her, you know?
Can I make a probably nonsensical conjecture?
No.
Thank you, Taggy. A few chapters back, the doctor wants to stay with one of the other two people who were there. Smerdyakov, who was having an epileptic fit, so we think. The doctor stays with him and says he's not going to sleep till morning, or not going to live till morning. That seems somewhat suspicious as far as like a 1 in a million shot that someone else did this. That just felt like an uncomfortable moment in a murder mystery or any kind of a literary device of like, I'll stay with him, he won't live. So
I see. Yeah, and there's an interesting note, like the doctor notes, like this is a case for science, you know. Yeah, we didn't ever talk about the doctor, but he's kind of a real minor background character mostly there. Okay, so yeah, let's move on to the next chapter. There's a passage that kind of reflect what we were talking about the dirty underwear and stuff. Page 44. He felt unbearably awkward. Everyone else was dressed, and he was undressed. And strangely, undressed, he himself seemed to feel guilty before them. And above all, he was almost ready to agree that he had indeed suddenly become lower than all of them, and that they now had every right to despise him. If everyone's undressed, it's not shameful, but when only one is undressed and the others are all looking, it's a disgrace. I've dreamed of being disgraced like this, you know. And then it talks about the dirty clothes and his ugly big toes. And this seems to be like a breaking point psychologically for him. Like he's starting to believe, you know, that they should look down on him.
Mm-hmm. He's losing his faith in his own nobility.
Right.
Is everybody, you know, it wouldn't be so bad if everybody was undressed, an argument for confession, or public or not? That if we were all airing our dirty laundry in public, then this wouldn't feel so awful?
Maybe back to Jimmy's point, like when he backtracked his comment about, well, we're all, I forget what it was, you know, but we all do terrible things,
but
or whatever.
Not all.
Well, we don't all do the same terrible things, but we all do less good than we intend in one way or another. That wasn't exactly, that's my paraphrasing. But
Unless you're chaotic evil, in which you do exactly as much good as you intended.
I think that's precisely what Dimitri is different from everybody else. Is that whole entire like aspect of like, yes, we are all part of this, but like Dimitri is like this singular thing. He sees himself as a singular thing. He wants to be this singular thing, and like his sins are singular. Whereas Alyosha is like, it's more of, or Zosima is more of like a universal aspect. Like we all actually do all these things. And like Dimitri almost picks up on it, but then he backtracks from it. And I think that's the biggest like insight to have, is that Dimitri almost had it and then he backtracked. Like, and that's a big point. That's a big radical departure from we're all guilty on behalf of all and for all versus I am guilty on behalf of all and for all. Like singular versus universal. And I think it's a huge difference. It's very small and slight, but I think it's huge.
Personally, I think it reminds me of what I learned in college when I was taking a psych course that was particularly about treatment of addiction and doing the research project on AA and some of the things that work, some of the things that don't. And there was this poster I saw, which was 10 myths that all alcoholics believe. And one of them was that I am the worst person in the world, that I am God's special case of despair. And what's so fascinating about that is there are so many things about that poster and about that just remind me of Dimitri in this chapter. And it reminds me of kind of the theological nature of shame, in the sense that it has a lot to do with nakedness. Because when you're ashamed because you're naked and people are looking at you, it reaches you on the level of substance. It's because like when someone's looking at you and you feel naked and you feel lower, it's not about deeds. And isn't it so interesting that with Dimitri, so much of his faux nobility is like, he's like, well, I've done this and I've done this and I've done this, but I'm also honorable, right? As if he somehow equates honor to a substance rather than his deportment or his actions, which are inexcusable. And so now, like, stripping him of that, right? Like, this is the nightmare. Now he doesn't have clothes. And it's amazing, and it's so unfortunate in a way, because this is also the moment where you think that this could be a moment of great learning and redemption, right? Like, and I mean, not that that seems to be what's going on, but isn't it interesting that there is that disconnect? And I think that's kind of, to Dmitri, I think that's kind of the fundamental problem we see, is that for some reason he doesn't seem to say, because when he says scoundrel, I'm a scoundrel, it's as if he doesn't seem to, like, he doesn't seem to say, well, what about your choices, right? This is about choices. And once again, if he feels convicted, it's because of their gaze. And but the idea, right, that he is guilty or doesn't guilty or should be hanged or shouldn't be hanged, it never seems to be about the critical issue of why they're there, which is, what did you do? Like, what actually did you do? And I don't know. I just think what's so interesting about those writers who talk about how Dmitri is symbolic of the body. You know, when I said the passions the first night, I really should have just said the body, like the carnal nature of man, not, you know, the passions as in the sinful passions. Is that in that, right? Like this is, I think Dmitri at his most bodily, right? And he is just so full of all these things you could be full of. He had gone to the heights of hope. Now he's at the heights of despair. And I feel like there's something that is intensely poignant about this being a supreme moment of his humiliation, where he believes that Grushenka is in the other room pining for him, and now he's been reduced to this horrible nakedness. And what was his hope of ecstasy? It was his hope of ecstasy to be accepted in Grushenka and happily ever after, right? But it's just this, you know, to me, and I think it shows once again the deeper message of Dostoevsky and this idea of heaven and hell, and that hell is about being in the gaze and not being able to take it. In the same sense, this Dmitri hell is not like that. It's not that he is in the gaze of love and can't handle it, right? If it would have been Grushenka, he would have found a way to handle it. But no, it's actually just being reduced, and it's being laid bare, and it's being it's being looked at like that justice itself is actually too much for Dmitri to bear. And so it's easy for him to condemn himself, because I think he condemns himself because he really cannot handle the condemnation of others.
I almost wonder if this whole dialogue is like two different people, like from two different perspectives, speaking completely different parallel narratives. Like Dmitri is speaking in a way to absolve his humility, or his not humility, his honor. And the other thing is just trying to get like just a realistic account of timelines and things. But like Dimitri's account is all about his honor. Like, I need to give a narrative specifically around that. And like, it doesn't matter. Timeline doesn't matter. Like, it's just my honor that matters. And I'm going to defend that with whatever I need to do. Because that's all I have. Because he's kind of accepted, and going back to like this whole idea of like choices versus like embodying, he sees himself as an embodiment of his choices versus like choices are just like things that might affect your soul, but like your soul is inherently good. But Dmitri has kind of not accepted that. He's kind of beyond redemption in his mind, I think. And his choices don't matter. He's just evil. And like that's how it is. But at least he's got this honor, and that's the only saving part of him. And when that honor is reduced through this interrogation, he's reduced to nothing, because he's got nothing else. Like, he doesn't have an inherent worth. He just sees himself as a worm. He's in his own hell to begin with, and like he's climbing himself out, but the only thing he has is his honor, and his honor is non-linear, and it's not in line with the prosecutor's questioning.
I'd like to highlight what I think is maybe the most significant passage in this chapter that we haven't discussed yet. On 46, it is sort of another appeal to his character to, explain his view of things. 486. This is this big paragraph that takes up most of the page. Gentlemen, you've befouled my soul. Can you possibly think I'd conceal it from you if I really killed my father? That I'd hedge and lie and hide? No, Dmitry Karamazov is not like that. He couldn't bear it. And if I were guilty, I swear I wouldn't have waited for you to come here or for the sun to rise as I originally intended. I'd have destroyed myself even before, without waiting for dawn. I feel that in myself now. I found out more in this one cursed night than I would have learned in 20 years of living. And so he's and to skip ahead, and you want me to reveal and tell about yet another new meanness of mine, yet another new disgrace to such scoffers as you, who do not see anything and do not believe anything, blind moles and scoffers. Even if it would save me from your accusation, better penal servitude. He doesn't know who killed him. That's all I can tell you, and enough. Stop badgering me. Exile me, hang me, but don't irritate me anymore. I'm silent. Call your witnesses. So, it's like the only argument he can make is, I'm the kind of guy that would tell you the truth. I could not bear this sort of dishonor in myself. In fact, I would have killed myself before I even got here. So now don't ask me to tell you the one thing I don't want to tell you about. Again, he's getting so frustrated that it's like, whatever, just hang me. Let's just stop the stupid interrogation. But somehow they pester him into telling it anyway. So that's the next chapter. Mitya's great secret met with hisses. So like, where did you get this money and what was this for? And why did you, need this money? So it's like, well, I have the amulet with $1,500 that I've saved. And they're just like, wait, what? That's your big secret? You didn't spend all the money the first time? Like, and that's what you're so ashamed of? I mean, you can kind of relate to the interrogators. They're like, your great shame is that you didn't spend all the money? But this is where it's just so important that he convey this, what he calls fatal difference, between being a thief and a scoundrel. He has this, I think, pretty comical line on page 492 near the bottom. Yes, I see the fatal difference. Any man can be and perhaps is a scoundrel, but not any man can be a thief. Only an arch scoundrel can be that. Well, I'm not very good at these subtleties. This is what I like. But still, a thief is more of a scoundrel than a scoundrel. That's my conviction.
Okay, I don't know if this reference will make sense to anybody else, but that line about being a scoundrel and what was it? Sorry, an arch scoundrel, made me think of in the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, when she's like, oh, I thought he was just a rat, but he was a super rat.
I don't remember the film.
That whole passage, his defense is procrastination.
This makes me think of the parable of the publican and the Pharisee, but like, here's Dmitry trying to justify himself. Like, I'm just not that bad, but like this weird sense of honor is a Pharisee. I don't know.
Well, to be fair, I have to give Dmitry a point on this one. Like, okay, you really didn't want to use your fiance's money to run off with the woman you're cheating on her with. As some have said before, there's a right way to do the wrong thing. And the fact that the interrogators can't grasp this point at all is a little baffling. that it's like now, and that's where you can see they've already completely written him off. Like this guy is just scum of the earth, basically. So who cares if you stole money, or if you do it this way and not that way, and I really feel Dimitri's frustration, knowing how important this is to his character, that this is his line in the sand that he refuses to cross, and that he just can't convey to them that, this is what I consider to be the ultimate dishonorable thing, and I would never do that. And they just can't even understand that as a motivation, even though they're the psychology, understanders of the criminal mind. That's one of those things that's just painful to watch and infuriating, and you feel really trapped there with Dimitri. Like that, I think really does a great job of making you feel exasperated with him.
Well, this part, absolutely. It completely frustrated me because, okay, so I might not personally, necessarily understand his reasoning or his line in the sand between being a scoundrel and a thief and keeping the money and all this. But the fact is, he's so passionate about it, and it's such a weird line in the sand that if he was going to lie about the money, he would have come up with a more believable lie. This is one of those where, I truly believe, truth is stranger than fiction. And the fact that they keep going on, and even into the next chapter with the witnesses and asking everybody else if it was $3,000 that he spent or $1,500, the truth is, it was so important to Dimitri that everyone else think he spent it all, that of course that's what he would have told everyone else. Nobody's actually able to add it all up. I know I'm getting into the next chapter, but this is starting here, and it's so frustrated me that nobody's able to actually add up the money he spent. I mean, the gypsies are gone. Who knows how much he gave them? Who knows how much, was somebody tallying the bottles of champagne last time? And the fact that they go on witnesses who the only thing the witnesses know is what Dimitri told them, which now Dimitri is saying is a lie, and it's explaining why he lied. Even if that doesn't make sense, I believe him, because why that lie it's too convoluted for him to be lying about it now, is my feeling. And I don't know if any of that made sense.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I want to highlight a passage on 494 that I underlined, where he explains this motivation a little bit, and what he's going through this night. Let's see. So they're asking, why did you decide to finally tear into the amulet and use it up? If that's your one line you can't cross. He says, why? A funny question. Because I had condemned myself to death at 5 o'clock in the morning here at dawn. It's all the same how I die, I thought, as a scoundrel or as a nobleman. But not so. It turned out not to be all the same. Believe me, gentlemen, what tormented me most this night was not that I had killed the old servant and that I was threatened with Siberia. And all of that when my love had been crowned and heaven was open to me again. Oh, that was a torment, but not so great, still not so great as the cursed awareness that had finally torn that cursed money off my chest and spent it, and therefore was now a final thief. Oh, gentlemen, I repeat to you in my heart's blood, I learned a lot this night. I learned that it is impossible not only to live as a scoundrel, but also to die a scoundrel. No, gentlemen, one must die honestly. I just thought that was kind of interesting that he reversed his position of despair, I'll go spend it, who cares how you die? And then, when he actually comes face to face with it, it's hello. Is no, it's very important not to die a scoundrel. It feels terrible. And I also very much love the colorful scene on the next page when the idiot prosecutor just can't understand why he didn't go straight to Katya and ask for the money to run off with Grushenka. And he starts pounding the table, but it would be such an abomination. It would stink so much, I can't tell you. And like that the guy doesn't get it. I mean, we've already said this numerous times, but what an idiot.
Yeah. Oh, female jealousy. Oh, yes. What a slimeball. Dmitri, I don't remember if we actually talked about this explicitly, but like Dmitri's concern, part of his concern about taking the money from Katya, asking for the money, is not just about like female jealousy, but it's also about like his guilt from winning her in the first place with his weird loan. When he talks about like how she would be giving it out of vengeance and contempt, like that, he's speaking from experience. Those were the feelings he was feeling as he gave her the money the first time. And I think, again, is a level of psychological complexity that the prosecutor would have some trouble grasping. But it's part of what's going on here. As far as bashing the interrogators here, I think it's also good to contrast like this whole last 50 pages with the other big interrogation-ish thing we had way back in book 1, where Zosima is trying to get the facts of the case out of all of the Karamazovs. The biggest difference being basically that the elder lets everybody talk mostly, and lets them tell their story in the way that they that makes sense to them, and also that he has the psychological perception to say pretty early on, like, don't lie, don't be too ashamed of yourself. I understand it's okay, but like, but try to spit it out, which are things that which is a degree of understanding that the interrogators can never get to. And also, he's not constantly berating them for like weird minor facts. I don't know. I thought that the religious and the juxtaposition of the religious interrogation and the state interrogation is kind of I don't know, interesting.
You said a line that made a connection for me there about when Zosima tells Fyodor, above all, don't be so ashamed of yourself or whatever. And you can kind of see this is really what eats away at Dmitri, is he's really so ashamed of having taken that money, as well as the past that you alluded to with Katerina. And I think to talk about Katerina for a second, on 495, in the middle paragraph, this is where he's pounding the table and saying this, which stinks so much if he did. He gives an interesting little portrait of his assessment of Katerina's character there. And do you know that she might have given me the money? She would have given it. She certainly would have given it. She would have given it out of vengeance, for the pleasure of revenge. She would have given it out of contempt for me, because she too is an infernal soul and a woman of great wrath. And I'd have taken the money. Oh, I'd have taken it. I would. And then all my life, oh God. So I think he saw in that was that would have been the kind of exact reverse of what he had done to her, and that she'd give it just to sort of let that, linger in your soul for a while. You took the money from me to run off.
Solid vengeance.
I don't think that's an accurate depiction of Katya's motivations, though. I mean, it certainly shows what Dmitri thinks of her, but I think that's more about where he is in his own head than about her motivations.
And I would love to hear how you read Katerina personally.
We haven't seen her in like hundreds of pages, so
Right.
I'm not 100% sure at the moment, because obviously she's gone through some changes. But I mean, certainly at the point in the book when I remember discussing her the most, was when she wanted to still be with Dmitri and basically let him continue to cheat on her and let him walk all over her. And she was kind of having this savior complex about it. And I think a lot of that is misguided, but understandable, again, given romantic notions. And I don't think any of it is vengeful. I think it was the word she would have given it out of vengeance that really struck me as I don't read Katya that way.
Yeah, I'm struck by his phrase, "a woman of great wrath." She's also an infernal soul.
Well, I think she likes to control things. But like, if Dmitri would go to her and like basically ask to like be let out of her control, I don't know if she'd take that very well. Could be really messy.
Yeah, because everything right now is so wonderful and clean. I think, though, isn't it interesting how, like, we talk about Dmitri and how he is so obsessed with, this sense of honor, but isn't it so interesting that it's really about, like, just this self-conception that he has and, something that these investigators, for some reason, don't seem to be able to understand. And yet, isn't the hilarity of it, like if we were to look at it from Zosima's point of view, isn't the hilarity of it that Dmitri is willing to lose all, to suffer all, to go to the gallows for his sense of self, which is so completely off from what it really is, in the sense that you are neither the great romantic nor the great scoundrel you think you are. Right, and I think that's so interesting how everything about Dmitri, his glory is that he's grandiose. He's grandiose in his grandeur. He's grandiose in his misery, and I think that was so exceptional. How I forgot who it was, but brought up the difference between Zosima getting the story. I'm just like, wow, isn't that so profound, how you have someone who's truly kind of a master of human psychology and how people are. Because for Zosima, he knows, like, okay, people, they might exaggerate a little bit, they might not tell their stories completely truthfully, but he'll let them speak because he knows that's going to reveal. And what's so extraordinary to me in this Keystone Copper team, these investigators, they're getting everything they need to convict him, even though they're so completely sucking at their job. I don't know, like that's amazing, because like one of the things I remember from when people say don't talk to the police lecture is a trained policeman, he will let you just talk and tell your story the way you want to tell it, as much and as long as you want.
Yeah, hang yourself.
Right, like, because they don't, I don't know, it's just like I feel so sorry for Dmitri, right, like, because wow. It's like, it's the perfect storm of how everything that possibly could go wrong, both inside and out, does go wrong.
I agree with that, Micah. I mean, he's somebody who can be reduced to, he's either a sociopath or he's a murderer who's most troubled by petty theft. I mean, like, his conception of himself does not line up with his actions.
Well, then that's like a whole like other like argument about like reducing people. Like Dmitri or any of us are not able to be reduced to like this whole like entire thing. Like Dmitri's very complicated. We see this throughout the entire book. But like here are these like crappy investigators that are like just trying to reduce him to like some sort of crappy little definition. Like. They're not letting him talk. They're trying to put him in a little box. He doesn't like that. Like that's not cool. That's not cool for any of us. But like it's a very human nature type of thing to do. Like
I'm not sure how much empathy we should expect of murderers, a murder investigation where everything points to you being guilty.
That's exactly what I was about to say, Mitya.
It's not really their job to be nice.
Well, I'm not saying be nice.
But in their position, though, he's either.
I mean, your point is taken, Michael, that they are not seeing him as a human being, that they're reducing him to a criminal, and they assume they understand everything about him because he's a murderer and he's done all this stuff. So, everything else of his motivations or his feelings might just be completely laughable.
Of his father, nonetheless.
They've pegged him for sure in a very small box.
Interestingly enough, I kept thinking about Columbo during this chapter. Has anyone seen the show Columbo?
Yes.
Okay, well, if you don't know, Columbo is based on that investigative character in Crime and Punishment, whose name escapes me right now. For some reason I can't, but there's this detective in Crime and Punishment who is just so experienced, and he's such a talented psychologist. He knows that the protagonist is guilty, like, immediately. But he can't prove it. And so the whole book, a lot of it is a dance between the investigator who knows he did it and trying to get him to confess. And that's the kind of basic premise for Columbo, is Columbo in every episode, he knows who did it, but now he's got to figure out how he can prove it. And the interesting thing is for Columbo, and I think it's important because it's based off a Dostoevsky character, because it even says in Crime and Punishment, the investigator, the talented investigator says, it's okay to show empathy to a suspect. I don't need to hate the suspect. I don't need to not understand why he did it. I only need to be able to prove that he did it. So even Dostoevsky's idea of a talented, competent investigator is a talented investigator, a talented detective can still be empathetic with his suspect, because how you feel about the suspect and showing empathy to the suspect doesn't adversely affect your job, only when you let it get in the way of proving in court that he's guilty. You can be extremely empathetic and sympathetic, just prove that he's guilty.
These guys are the bumbling backwoods donut cops for sure.
And I only know Columbo because of The Simpsons, to be honest. So.
I love how Dostoevsky sets up his
Michael, wait. Jenny's going to say something.
Oh, thanks. I don't know Columbo, but I think it's really interesting that Micah brought that up, because I had just been thinking before he brought that up that so many modern current cop shows, there's this sort of premise that whoever you think did it in the beginning is never it, because that's what makes the episode interesting. It's sort of this formula for cop shows now that there's a really obvious suspect, and you can tell the terrible cops because they don't look outside the box and they assume it's just that first suspect, and it's always some twist and some weird thing. And so I feel like that's also relevant, and it's like you're saying, yeah, these are backwoods terrible cops, but that's also sort of what the law enforcement system does, is it kind of pushes cops to make snap judgments and to go after suspects, and sometimes to not really look outside that.
I'd like to know if the commissioner would have actually arrested Grushenko if the other two hadn't pulled him back at the very beginning. We got her. We got the one.
Well, I just love how Dostoevsky talks about and puts into the story about these investigators. One is he's got a certain notoriety about being a naughty boy, whatever that means. But
all right.
Yeah.
These investigators are not clean people either. It's it's kind of funny, but whatever naughty boy means, I'm not sure. But
I can draw you a diagram.
Oh boy.
Let's go ahead and move on to chapter. It's getting late. No diagram from Aaron.
I don't want to see the diagram, but I have to, and I'm very curious about what he's going to draw.
Later. I'll tell you later.
So in chapter 8, we get the evidence of the witnesses. Trifon Borisovich, the innkeeper, whatever. I just want to mention, boy, does he hate the peasants. Like, he never misses an opportunity to tell you how terrible the peasants are. And, like, you know, they all have lice. Like, there's nothing there but lice. And, you know, he seems like a wonderful human being. We get those Polish jerks again. And that's sort of an entertaining moment. There's like near fisticuffs there with those guys and Dmitri. And some great, like, write this down, let the record reflect that, you know, that I said that they're a scoundrel, even though I didn't have to, or whatever it is. Record, I'm still shouting that he's a scoundrel. I'm going to want to talk about the dream at the end of this chapter most, but before we go to that, does anyone have any other comments?
Nikolai Parfenovich grossly hits on Grushenka on the stand.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's not cool.
He's like, oh, well, you know, and if you need someone to go home, take you home. Like, I'm happy to take you.
What are you doing after this?
Oh, not a great look for our guy.
Naughty boy.
He did it again. McG slam dunked.
It's kind of weird that they keep starting with the romantic points and then having to move on, you know? Like, yeah, let's get to business.
They're just dirty old men.
Yeah.
So I think I pretty much already said when we were talking about the last chapter, my impression of this chapter, which is the witnesses really had no idea how much the money was, and this is really a stupid question for the interrogators to be asking. Like, either show us receipts or shut up and agree that nobody actually knows how much money it was.
Yeah. My favorite is when Maximov comes in and testifies. He's like, there's definitely 20,000.
And I would know because I've seen 20,000 or possibly 7,000 in the past.
Which was when his wife like ran off after making him transfer his whole town to her name, whatever. And she's like, "Got it, baby. See ya."
Between the time period and their anti-Semitism, I don't think the bookkeeping is very good at this time period.
Well, of course the bookkeeping is bad. They don't have any decent Jews around to do it because of the
Exactly.
anti-Semitism.
They hate all the Jews. I keep saying it.
Well, no, this is the town where they definitely had Jews because they brought them in to play all the music. Remember?
Yes, they had the gypsies.
They're like, well, they'll get up and.
Those are not bookkeeping Jews.
Those are the trumpet ones.
Those are
The problem.
Those are the cymbal players.
Left town, and the
By the
gypsies
way,
didn't give them a receipt.
for any strangers who watch this on YouTube, I have quite a bit of Jewish in my heritage, so this is not an actual. Like, please understand, it's self-loathing that's happening, not racism.
What was I going to say? I was wondering, Ginny, if this was one of the points where you possibly checked back on the earlier facts. Because we have all these witnesses that say, he told me this, he said 3,000, he said 6,000. Like, the first interview with Trifon Borisovich, he's like, you clearly stated right when you got here that, you know, you'd come with 3,000 rubles. Did you check back on those?
I did not. No.
Because
Sorry.
I actually did. And he did not specifically say, I have 3,000. What he says, I brought the same as last time.
Mm.
Yeah. But then you have witnesses, multiple witnesses, saying they heard him say it comes to 6,000, you know. And that also is, we don't hear that, but you got multiple people testifying that. So it's like, you start to wonder how much of this is a sort of groupthink about, you know, we all were led to believe it's 3,000. He's back with the same, and so, or was, you know, either people are misremembering and kind of filling in blanks in their own mind, and they're very convinced that that's true, or Dmitri was lying the whole time, you know. Well, is he lying about the 1,500 in the amulet, or did he lie about it's 6,000? Because we have all these kind of messy cross witness accounts. So
But no one's actually investigated like the party.
they shouldn't have been allowed to have that. Shut that down.
Like, is this a $1,500 ruble party or is this a 3,000 ruble party? I don't know.
Did they get bottle service? They had vodka filtered through diamonds, right?
That sounds more like 3,000, but filtered through gold. I mean, like that's only 1,500.
Are you guys ready to move on to the dream?
That was ethereal and trippy, and yes, please.
Okay, so this I think is the coolest part of this chapter. Page 507, 508. He falls asleep while they're like going over the accounts or whatever. Yeah, and we get this like he's driving in the snow with this village that's all burned out, and everyone's standing along the road begging. There's his mother's, the baby is crying, and he keeps asking all these questions. Why are they crying? Why are they poor? Why is the wee one poor? Why don't they feed it? The only answer is they're poor, burnt out, they've got no bread, they're begging for their burnt down place. And there's this interesting line where he says, and he feels within himself that though his questions have no reason or sense, he still certainly wants to ask in just that way. And he should ask in just that way. And I'm very much reminded of Yvonne here in Rebellion, like this sudden concern for injustice and, why does this situation exist on Earth? What are your thoughts on this dream and his reaction? He goes on to have a kind of very emotional moment at the end of this.
I think he ties it back to Yvonne kind of with a hammer when he says that this is felt with like Karamazov, like unrestraint. That this is a theme between the brothers and the theme in human nature.
Like he needs this to be fixed right now.
Yeah.
And throw himself at it completely, which Yvonne did say something like, I want retribution, or I forget what he said. But it's like on this earth where I can see it right here.
I liked the immediate counterpoint where Grushenka immediately comforts him as he's coming out of this, saying, I'll be with you forever. I love you. Like even in suffering, even in hopelessness, that there's love, that there's, even if it's impetuous, short-sighted love, that there's a counterpoint to suffering.
I want to read what I think is one of the most poignant lines. This is top of 508, right at the top. Right after he says he needs to ask these questions exactly this way. And he also feels a tenderness such as he has never known before surging up in his heart. He wants to weep. He wants to do something for them all so that the wee one will no longer cry, so that the black and dried up mother of the wee one will not cry either, so that there will be no more tears in anyone from that moment on. And it must be done at once, without delay, and despite everything, with all his Karamazov unrestrained. You wonder, where is this coming from? Why this right now?
Dimitri's complex.
I mean, he's also sorry.
No, go ahead.
He's also confessed, not in the best way, but he's unburdened his soul, both of he's gotten to tell his, most of his story, and he's let go of the big secret he was sitting on. So that, that may unlock some, something within him.
Like Dmitri has a capacity to love. I mean, that's the whole point. Is like it's not like this whole Dimitri's like this evil person that's like incapable of love. I mean, like, and here he is like demonstrating the exact same thing that Ivan has, like this capacity to love, and like it's just what you do with it. I think Alyosha has the same thing, and Zosima has the same thing. It's like this very human aspect of no matter how wretched and evil and whatever you might be, we all have some certain capacity to love, and I think that's really the whole point to take away. But that's what I take from it.
We have mentioned the parallels here to Ivan's concerns for justice on Earth, and his just very how grieved or troubled he is by suffering. I'm also really struck by the parallels here with Alyosha's kind of epiphany moment, where he has this dream vision of the wedding at Cana and sees Zosima, and then wakes up and falls to the earth and kisses it and kind of dedicates himself to love the whole world or whatever. That just sounds a little parallel with Dmitri feeling such tenderness as he had never known surging in his heart, wanting to weep and to do something for all of them so that they won't cry. And he wakes up and says, "I had a good dream, gentlemen," and he's filled with joy, and it really seems to change his demeanor in the next chapter. He suddenly makes this kind of rapturous speech on 509 that I think is directly tied to this. Do you guys mind if I read that?
Go for it.
I know I do a lot of reading, but they're telling him that he's going to have to be locked up, basically, and he says, "Wait, gentlemen, wait, Mitya." This is the middle of page 509. "Wait," Mitya interrupted suddenly, and with some irrepressible feeling he spoke, addressing everyone in the room. "Gentlemen, we are all cruel. We are all monsters. We all make people weep, mothers and nursing babies. But of all, let it be settled here and now, of all, I am the lowest vermin. So be it. Every day of my life I've been beating my breast and promising to reform, and every day I've done the same vile things. I understand now that for men such as I, a blow is needed, a blow of fate, to catch them as with a noose and bind them by an external force. Never, never would I have risen by myself. But the thunder has struck. I accept the torment of accusation and of my disgrace before all. I want to suffer and be purified by suffering, and perhaps I will be purified, eh, gentlemen? But hear me all the same for the last time. I'm not guilty of my father's blood. I accept punishment not because I killed him, but because I wanted to kill him and might well have killed him. But even so, I intend to fight you and let God decide. Don't be angry that I shouted at you during the interrogation. Oh, I was still so foolish then. Another moment and I'll be a prisoner, but now, for the last time, while he is still a free man, Dmitri Karamazov offers you his hand. Saying farewell to you, I say it to all men." I find this to be a striking passage, as though he's had some sort of revelation by going through this whole process of the torments. On that note, I just want to say one thing in case not everyone read the footnote about the torments at the very beginning, that this is actually an allusion to a sort of myth that is sometimes told within Orthodox religious circles about the soul after death passing through these different stations where it's tested to see if it can withstand different temptations or whatever. And as the author notes, there's an idea of purification involved with that. So there's the subtext that perhaps these are not just pointless torments, but there is maybe some sort of ascendance or ascending motion going on that's somehow purifying Dmitri, and it certainly seems to lead up to something for him here. So I'm curious what you guys think about this dream, this kind of conclusion he draws, and the speech he makes at the end. You know, is there a development in Dmitri's character here, or is this just another sudden outburst? Maybe that's not the right question to ask. Let me just say, what's your take on that speech?
I think the biggest thing I noticed was the parallels to Ivan and Alyosha, and like here's Dmitri confronting these same questions that we've talked about, and coming at it with some of the same conclusions and some just kind of a slightly different slant on it.
Yeah, the lowest component in there is the parallel. I'm the least among sinners. I'm the lowest of vermin.
And the question is he saying that in a different sense than he was saying that before, when he's racked with guilt but trying to still prove his honor?
I mean, I find him to be genuine, but just fickle. I don't know that I find him to be a liar or a thief. I find him to be just impetuous and impatient. I think he means what he says when he says it. I could be a moron, but
I guess what I'm driving at here is, in the past he's been saying he's a terrible person all along, right?
mm-hmm.
He's still saying he's a terrible person here, but it seems like there's a different level of awareness that this, and maybe back to Michael's point about maybe this time it's not only about himself, because he's had this vision of these other people suffering, and why does the wee one have to suffer? You know, and he's seeing that in some way I'm also responsible for the suffering of other people, and that changes things. So that even though I'm not guilty, you know, he's saying I'm not guilty and I'm going to fight you. I didn't kill my dad, but I maybe will accept the punishment because it's what I need to transform. So like this is maybe some degree of a more universal acceptance of a healthy idea of responsibility, more like what Zosima was talking about, than in the past where he's just been, I punished myself for my whole life. You know, I don't know. Is it enough of a difference? But I sense maybe some change here.
I definitely think that the difference is looking at just himself versus looking at everyone. I mean, we talked quite a bit about that point a few chapters ago where he says, oh, everybody does this. Oh, no, I was mistaken. It's just me. It's just me. Well, here he does say it's everyone. Like, I'm the worst of all, but he says it's everyone, and he doesn't walk it back this time.
I think it's a radical departure. I'm just going to throw it out there. I think it's a huge change for him, and it's interlocated with like joy at the same extreme. Like he's joyful about this change, which is maybe true to Dimitri's style. I'm not sure, but I think for others it might not be quite as true. I'm not sure if he actually got joy before. But I think now he does have some sort of joy, and he's happy to accept it, and that's like he's accepting it, is not fighting it, and it's not inward based, and it's a complete transformation. That's the way I see it, from my own understanding. It might be deeply personal as well, but
I get
with
this.
Aaron.
Let me say, sorry, one quick sentence in direct response to Michael, which which I'm forgetting as I even interrupt you. I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, it seems like there's a sense of relief that this is kind of what he's been waiting for his whole life. Like, there's a break that's happening that he's kind of like, I've never been able to get to this point, and I've woken up or something. So I'm gonna side with Michael, and now I'm gonna hear why Micah sides with Aaron.
Well, I think the reason why I'm not convinced. I mean, I do think this is an important step. And I do think it's radical in the sense that it goes to the root. But like, imagine if you would, like, let's say, when we talk about something going beneath the skin, a change that goes really deep. A very, very, very narrow needle still gets into the vein, but it's not necessarily going to change it that much. It goes deep, but to me, this is like, I think of this almost as the first time Dmitri goes to rehab, right? Like, there's a lot of awareness that's happening. There's a lot of progress that's happening. But, to me, I don't think he's quite there yet, because you see, the thing is, he surrenders, but he only surrenders because what else is he gonna do, right? Like, it's at that moment where, right, he did not really confess, like, he did not do the thing. He did not go St. Francis of Assisi and get naked in the square, the way a Zosima would. He was literally stripped. And so he's having some of the right responses, but I think it's still being forced upon him. And so I still think that Aaron is right. We're talking about somebody who, he feels it, right? And because he has the right feeling, he can think the right thoughts. Give him a different feeling, he'll think the wrong thoughts. And so, to me, I think that, and by the way, when I say that, I'm filled with personal bias as well, because let me tell you what, right? Like, I have never, like, when you're with the people who are like super holy and really love Jesus and love you, and like when you're like with those people who like they give you the love of Jesus just by being with them, isn't it easy to have faith? But then you go away to that other city where everyone treats you like a son of a bitch. Yes, I'm talking about you, Cleveland. And all of a sudden, you're living in the mistake by the lake. The lake catches on fire. The lake catches on fire. Not joking, by the way. That's the thing. The lake in Cleveland catches on fire.
We know there's a beer named after it. I think most of us.
Burning River.
And all of a sudden, you spend enough time in Cleveland or in Lansing, Michigan, you begin wondering again whether or not there's a God. So being very Dmitri-like myself, I think Aaron said it best. I think he's sincere, but he's fickle.
Okay, well, I'm gonna totally load my chips now on first time to rehab. I like that one a lot.
I mostly like that God has forsaken the Rust Belt.
I don't know if I said it before, but I like the sincere but fickle, like, paradox.
I thought you were going to say, I don't know if I've said it before, but I like Cleveland.
I don't have strong opinions about Cleveland. I have strong opinions about Ohio in general.
Only actual Ohio native, so.
Yeah.
And by the way, Cleveland, I will always love you as a city more than anyone should ever love the Cleveland Show. It's wrong they named that show after you.
Cleveland is better than the Cleveland Show.
In a minute, I want to wrap up and talk about the end of chapter where Dimitri's taken away. But before we go on, I'm just really curious to hear, first-time readers, we've got a lot of different perspectives. This is for only first-time readers. Do you believe Dmitri or not? Do you think he killed his dad? Where are you at on, your assessment of Dmitri and his story?
So, in case it's not obvious from earlier tonight, I totally believe Dmitri. I do not think he killed his father, and I would like to take this opportunity. I'm really sorry I didn't do it when we were back in that chapter, like 3 chapters ago, but I just found it because this is what I get for reading in bed. I don't underline things and make notes, so I had to find it again when I remembered. But McGee, you were talking about going back and like double checking things. There was something on page 488 that I went back and checked the page before, and the interrogators totally lied in the middle of the interrogation. So there's a bit on 488 where they're talking about the envelope that was in Fyodor's bedroom that had been filled with money, and now the money's gone. And on 488, I forget which prosecutor says, but you also knew about the envelope and that it was under the pillow. And Dmitri says, I never knew. I've never seen it before. I just heard about it. I didn't really know. And yet you yourself told us just now that the envelope was under your deceased father's pillow. You precisely said under the pillow. We've written it down. I'm looking at the page before. He never said anything about a pillow.
He did though. A chapter or two before that, when he first. Oh, damn! I thought I looked at this also. Maybe I'm just remembering that he told Alyosha that it was under the pillow because he did know.
I didn't remember that he knew it all. I thought the interrogators just made it up.
But I think he said it to the interrogators also. I'm not sure.
This is where I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, 462. Top of 462.
462.
Because I had the same exact reaction. I went back to the page before. I was like, "Fuck you!" Because from the very beginning of this, people have been lying about him. Fenya says like he came in and was like, "I just killed somebody," and he absolutely did not say that to her. At the very beginning of this book.
It is top of 462. Okay, I was wrong. I still believe.
So that is like one occasion where the interrogators were not full of shit.
Right. Okay.
In general, I absolutely agree with you.
There's a whole lot of trying to sort out, like, whose story actually lines up with the things we read. There's so many points you could check back on.
Who were the other first-time readers?
It's you, it's Taggy, Jenny, and David.
Taggy, your turn.
Yeah. That's it.
Way out of that. He's not sure.
My turn.
Say something. Aaron, you have to make noise so the screen goes to you.
Hashtag free Mitya.
Serial season 4.
David, you want to weigh in? Are you there?
I don't think he killed him. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I don't think I did it, but
It appears David is collecting nuts for the winter.
Which, I mean,
hopefully it should be over soon.
Well, so
Dear
it
God,
could be-
please.
2.5 more months, yeah.
Okay, well, David's busy with something else. So, okay, I was real curious. I myself have gone back and forth on that sometimes. So, all right. So I think the end of this chapter Mitya is taken away is kind of interesting because we've been talking a lot about Dmitri and his pride, and he can't ask for forgiveness, and he has to defend himself. And then you look at the bottom of page 510, he makes this he says, "Farewell and forgive God's people," as he's about to drive off. And they say, "And you forgive us." 2 or 3 voices were heard. And if you're Orthodox and you're reading this on Forgiveness Sunday, this is just, like amazing. Because this is what we just did today in church. We went around and asked everybody, like, forgive me, you know. So it's really fitting this fell on today. I think it's very interesting that he's doing this all of a sudden, and then Trifon Borosovich will not forgive. I think it's really interesting that a couple people in the crowd called back, "Forgive us." This really does model an Orthodox practice, so I'm feeling like that's where that's coming from. But I think it's interesting that, like, I mean, to everybody there, it looks like he definitely killed his dad. And there's still a couple people who are like, yeah, and you forgive us, which is kind of mind-blowing. I think what is particularly interesting and touching is the final exchange with Kalganov. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but so Trifon Borisovich is absolutely refusing to engage with Dmitri as a human being. He's basically scorning him. The Mavrikievich is like, chastising, like, don't talk with me like you're familiar with me, jerk. You're a criminal. Everyone's basically now shutting down and refusing to engage with him. And then all of a sudden, Kalganov comes running up, like the young man, makes a point to shake his hand. And Dmitri's really moved by this. He says, "Farewell, you dear man. I won't forget this magnanimity." And I think what's really fascinating about this is that Kalganov is absolutely convinced that he's guilty. And yet he still feels like he needs to run up and say goodbye, and make this sort of human gesture. And I think that's incredibly moving and touching.
Who's Kalganov? I forget.
He's the young man that was with Maximov, and there during the card game. He's the one that warned them that the Poles were cheating. He's the kind of handsome guy that Grushenko was flirting with for a while.
Okay.
And kind of a little bit of a carefree spirit.
Was he also the one who was bros with Musov at the very beginning?
Yes.
Was that him?
They're relatives. Yeah. So he doesn't know Dmitri all that well. But I find that very moving that, like, even though he believes this guy is a murderer, he runs up and shakes his hand. And then the whole book ends with him kind of in despair about human nature. He believed almost completely in Mitya's guilt. What are these people? What sort of people can there be after this? He kept exclaiming incoherently, in bitter dejection, almost in despair. And at that moment, he did not even want to live in the world. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? The grieved man kept exclaiming. I just find that like a really poignant ending to this book. And I don't really know why or what I'm trying to say here, but, I'm wondering if you guys have thoughts on this whole farewell scene. I've skipped over Grushenka as well, so that's worth talking about.
I was moved by that same piece. Part of it I thought of as, as negative ripples instead of the active love sort of spreading through the world, the way that despair can also beget despair, and the way that this brutal process has, driven another guy to be like, well, is it worth it? It's.
Are you talking about the whole exchange with like "forgive me" or the?
No, I meant that the process of the sort of Dmitri's the process of wrecking Dmitri itself has been the sort of negative energy put out into the world that ruins Kalganov, or breaks his heart.
I'm glad you bring that up, because we haven't really spent much time talking about negative ripple patterns in the books, but they are definitely there, and Dmitri is right at the heart of quite a lot of those ripples, which we've seen with the humiliated whisk broom officer. You know, one of the big examples early on. Obviously, his dad is now dead, and he has something to do with that somehow, like in all the chaos he's created. And yeah, I think I hadn't even noticed or thought of that really. I'm glad you brought up Kalganov. I mean, here's just like a complete bystander for the most part, but like he's been so kind of traumatized by this event. Like, is it even worth living? You know, and this, like, even if Dmitri is innocent, just sort of the chaos of his life has had this ripple effect that here's this innocent bystander who's basically sucked into his, into his sort of despair.
Vortex of sadness.
Yeah, thank you. That's it.
That's our emo band for the night.
Nice. What I think is interesting about this particular ripple and how it relates to Kalganov is, yes, it brings Kalganov despair, but we also see compassion, which I think is very important. And when we were talking a few minutes ago about the forgive and you forgive us, this phrase just strangely popped into my head. Criminals are people too. And I think, the point being, like, we've talked so much about the interrogators putting him in this box. He's a murderer, he's a criminal. That's separate. And I think the point both of forgive us back, and also Kalganov believing in his guilt but still shaking his hand, is this this idea that, we're all guilty. We haven't all committed murder, but we're all guilty of something. We're all in this together. Even if you've done terrible things, you still have value as a human being. And I think that compassion is super important, and what was really moving to me about this.
And very touching to Dmitri as well. That made a big impact on him. Like, that little gesture at that moment of recognizing his humanity was a huge token to him when everyone else has written him off. And there's one other very similar moment when he wakes up from his dream and finds that someone has put a pillow under his head. He's rapturous about that too. Like, who did this wonderful thing for me, And I think I told my story about the hospital where the nurse helped wash my hair and all that stuff. But it's a similar kind of thing. Like, in a moment of complete humiliation, when someone gives that token gesture of recognizing your human dignity, it's about the greatest gift you could possibly give anybody. And so I'm very moved by Kalganov, who's completely convinced of his guilt, running up to make sure he does that moment, like it's at least worth saying goodbye, in a human way.
Yeah, and I think it's significant you said running up. It's not like he was standing right there and offered his hand. He specifically, like, pushed his way through a crowd, I think it says, to make sure that he could make that gesture.
It's like the coach is taking off, and he's, getting there right in time. There is a little Grushenka exchange. Is that worth commenting about? Is there? Am I remembering this wrong?
No, there is. It's in the middle of...
Oh, yeah, there it is, 510. Yeah, 510.
I don't know that I have anything profound to say about it.
Grushenka was brought in, but the farewell's brief. She made a low bow. I've told you that I'm yours, and I will be yours. I will go with you forever, wherever they doom you to go. Farewell, guiltless man, who have been your own ruin. Like, that's kind of a profound line. Forgive me, Grusha, for my love that I've ruined you too with my love.
Yeah.
Probably a fair statement.
Aaron, during this passage, I was actually thinking of you, because I was just thinking, don't they need somebody just to give that, somewhat, barbing but nice big dose of common sense. Like, no one needs to be ruined here. You know, I think I literally heard Aaron's voice say, or.
Thank you for thinking of your friendly neighborhood economist. I appreciate that.
Just the whole situation needed a healthy dose of pragmatism.
Yep.
I think we can probably wrap up our discussion unless anyone has anything else to add. I'm sad that we lost David. He just kind of fell away.
What does that say?
Bear has something to say.
Buford says free Mitya.
I thought you were pretty convinced of his guilt, though, Aaron. The way you were
Well, he just went up and shook his hand. He's Kalganov, actually. So.
Hey, if he's guilty, I'm guilty, so I think he should walk.
If the
All right,
glove
well-
don't fit, you know.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a delight as usual, and I will see you next week for Book 10, Boys, which is a real change of pace, kind of a totally different side plot. So a little more lighthearted, well, for a while. It's Dostoevsky, it can't last. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.